My name is Daniel, and this story began during one of the most turbulent and confusing periods of my adolescence. I was only 16 years old when my mother passed away. Before that devastating day, my life had been a portrait of normalcy and comfort. My mother was the heart of our home, radiating warmth, patience, and a gentle humor that could fill every room. Our house was constantly alive with the sound of laughter. Even when my father returned home exhausted from his long days at work, my mother possessed a unique gift for lifting his spirits and making him smile again. But after her death, everything meaningful in our lives seemed to shatter.
Our home, once a sanctuary of joy, became oppressively quiet. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. The kitchen, which used to welcome us with the aroma of home-cooked meals and the soft melody of her favorite radio station, now felt cold, sterile, and abandoned. My father retreated into himself, his words becoming as scarce as the laughter that had once filled our evenings. He would spend hours alone in the living room, lost in the past, silently staring at old photograph albums. For nearly a year, it was just the two of us navigating our shared grief. During that time, I did my utmost to be strong. I taught myself to cook simple meals, took over the cleaning, and managed the small daily chores that kept our household running. I understood that my father was drowning in sorrow, and the last thing I wanted was to add to his burden. Yet there were countless nights when I would lie in my bed, the silence pressing in on me, and miss my mother with such an intense ache that sleep became an impossible dream.
One ordinary evening, my father summoned me into the living room. The serious tone of his voice immediately put me on edge. "Daniel," he began slowly, his face etched with a tension I hadn't seen in months. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." I sat down across from him, my mind racing through 100 possible explanations for his grave expression. "I've met someone," he finally confessed. For a long moment his words didn't register. Then the meaning slowly dawned on me. "You mean a woman?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He simply nodded. He explained that her name was Laura. They had met at a quaint little bookstore in town where she worked as the manager. Their conversations had started casually whenever he visited, but over time those brief exchanges grew into longer discussions about books and life. Eventually, they began having dinner together. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen," my father said, his voice quiet and vulnerable. "But being with her, she's made me feel alive again for the first time since your mother died." I was utterly speechless. A part of me, the logical part, understood that my father deserved a second chance at happiness. But a deeper, more wounded part of me felt a profound sense of betrayal. The thought of another woman entering our family, of someone else sitting in my mother's chair, felt deeply unnatural and wrong. A few weeks later, I met Laura for the first time. She arrived at our house on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I remember standing awkwardly by the front door as my father made the introduction. "Daniel, this is Laura." She offered a warm, genuine smile and extended her hand. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Daniel." Laura possessed an understated elegance. She had dark brown hair neatly tied back and calm, perceptive gray eyes. Her voice was soft, and her smile seemed sincere. Despite her warm demeanor, I was filled with anxiety. I shook her hand politely, but remained silent, my eyes fixed on the floor.
During lunch, Laura made several gentle attempts to engage me in conversation. She asked about my classes at school, my hobbies, and what kind of books I enjoyed reading. I responded with monosyllabic answers, keeping my guard up. I wasn't intentionally trying to be impolite. I simply didn't know how to behave in her presence. My father, however, was a different person. He laughed more during that one lunch than he had in the entire previous year. The sound was both comforting and unsettling. Over the subsequent months, Laura's visits became a regular occurrence. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she wove herself into the fabric of our daily routine. She would often help prepare dinner or arrive with homemade desserts she had baked. It was evident that my father cherished her company. Then, one evening, he made another significant announcement. "Laura and I are getting married." His words hung in the air, as sudden and shocking as a summer storm. I forced a tight, unconvincing smile because I couldn't bear to hurt him. But internally, I was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, confusion, anxiety, and a quiet, creeping fear that the delicate equilibrium of our family was about to be irrevocably shattered.
The wedding was a small, modest ceremony. Only a handful of relatives and close friends were present. From that day forward, Laura officially became my stepmother. Initially, sharing a home with her felt incredibly awkward. She tried so hard to be kind. Every morning she would greet me with a cheerful, "Good morning." She prepared breakfast before I left for school and would always ask about my day when I returned. Yet I maintained a deliberate distance. Something deep inside me stubbornly refused to accept her. I would often tell myself, she can never replace my real mother. Days turned into weeks, and weeks melted into months. Life gradually settled into a new, albeit foreign, routine. My father appeared happier, and our house no longer felt as silent as a tomb. However, Laura remained an enigma to me. I began to notice small, peculiar incidents. For instance, she would occasionally receive phone calls late at night.
When the phone rang, she would quietly slip outside to answer it. When she returned, her expression would be clouded with worry. On another occasion, I saw her engrossed in a thick envelope filled with documents at the kitchen table. The moment she noticed me enter the room, she quickly shuffled the papers into a drawer. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, but these strange occurrences continued. One afternoon, I arrived home earlier than expected because my teacher had canceled the last class. As I approached our house, I saw Laura standing near the front gate, deeply engrossed in conversation with a man I had never seen before. Their discussion seemed intense. The man handed her a small, unmarked package. When Laura spotted me, her reaction was startling. She swiftly concealed the package in her bag and abruptly ended the conversation. "Daniel, you're home early," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too casual. The man gave me a brief, curious glance before hurrying away. "Who was that?" I inquired. "Oh, no one important, just a colleague from the bookstore," she replied quickly. Her answer felt rehearsed, too smooth. Later that evening, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. Why had she appeared so nervous? Why had she hidden the package with such haste? Over the next few days, my curiosity intensified into a persistent obsession. I began observing Laura with heightened scrutiny. The more I watched, the more inconsistencies I uncovered.
Sometimes she would leave the house without a word of explanation about her destination. Other times, she would spend hours writing in a small black notebook that she kept carefully concealed in her bedroom drawer. I became convinced she was harboring a significant secret.
One night, while the house lay in deep sleep, I crept to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed the hallway, I noticed a faint sliver of light emanating from Laura's study. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking inside, I saw Laura seated at her desk, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. "I understand," she whispered, "but we must be extremely cautious. Daniel cannot know about this yet." My heart hammered against my ribs. Cannot know about what? I stood paralyzed in the dark hallway, straining to hear more. Laura continued, her voice laced with anxiety. "Yes, I promised I would handle everything. Just give me a little more time." Then she ended the call. I retreated to my room as silently as a ghost before she could discover me. I didn't sleep a wink that night. My mind was a relentless loop, replaying the same terrifying question. What secret was my stepmother hiding from me? And why did it feel like that secret had the power to dismantle our family? I had no idea that this mystery was merely the prologue to a much larger revelation. And soon, I would discover that the truth about my stepmother was far more astonishing than I could have ever imagined.
After that night in the hallway, the words from Laura's secret phone call echoed in my mind like a broken record. Daniel cannot know about this yet. They filled me with a deep, unsettling dread. Why would my stepmother need to keep a secret from me? And why did it sound so ominous? The next morning, I made a conscious effort to act normally at breakfast. Laura was at the stove, cooking eggs, while soft music played from the kitchen radio. My father sat at the table, engrossed in his newspaper. The scene was the picture of domestic peace, but to me, everything felt fabricated and fragile. Laura smiled warmly when she saw me. "Good morning, Daniel. Did you sleep well?" For a fleeting second, I wondered if she could see the knowledge in my eyes. Her face was serene, but I searched it for any trace of deception.
"I slept fine," I lied. It was a complete falsehood. Throughout breakfast, I watched her like a hawk. She chatted with my father about mundane things, groceries, work, weekend errands. She laughed her natural laugh, just as she always did. If she was concealing something, she was a master of disguise. Later at school, I was completely unable to concentrate. My teachers' voices faded into a meaningless drone as my mind remained fixated on the mystery. After school, I walked home slowly, lost in thought. When I arrived, the house was empty. My father was still at work, and Laura was out. The silence was deafening. I sat in the living room for a while, staring blankly at the television. My thoughts inevitably circled back to one idea. Maybe I should try to find the truth myself. I knew it was a violation of privacy, but my curiosity had become an unbearable weight.
Finally, I made a decision. I got up and walked towards Laura's study. The door was closed, but unlocked. I hesitated, my hand on the knob, before slowly pushing it open. The room smelled faintly of paper, leather, and Laura's subtle perfume. Everything was meticulously organized. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, and novels were arranged in perfect order on the shelves. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. I began my search carefully, trying to leave everything as I found it. I opened the desk drawers one by one. The first held pens and office supplies. The second contained envelopes and old receipts. Then I opened the third drawer. Inside, lying alone, was the small black notebook. My heart pounded. This was the notebook I had seen her writing in so often. I hesitated once more. the weight of my intrusion pressing down on me. But the need to know was too powerful. I opened it. The initial pages appeared to be mundane daily notes, shopping lists, reminders, and simple schedules written in neat handwriting. But as I flipped further, I noticed something peculiar. Several entries listed dates and locations. Beside them were cryptic phrases like "meeting confirmed," "package delivered," and "next step soon." I frowned, my confusion growing. What kind of meetings were these? What packages? Then I reached a page that made my stomach clench. At the top, in bold letters, was my name, Daniel. Beneath it were several sentences. Daniel is still unaware. Must protect him until the right time. Everything depends on keeping the truth hidden for now. I stared at the words, a wave of shock and a flicker of anger washing over me. Protect me from what? And what truth?
Suddenly, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the silence. My heart leaped into my throat. Laura was home. In a panic, I closed the notebook, shoved it back into the drawer exactly as I had found it, and fled the study. I rushed to the living room and threw myself onto the sofa, trying to look casual. Seconds later, the front door opened. "Daniel, are you home?" Laura's cheerful voice called out. "Yeah," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. She entered, carrying a small bag of groceries. "I didn't expect you to beat me home," she said with a smile. "School ended early," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. For the rest of the evening, I observed her with a new intensity. Having read the notebook, every tiny gesture now seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Was she genuinely trying to protect me, or was there a more sinister explanation?
That night, I resolved to find more answers. Around midnight, when the house was submerged in silence, I silently crept out of my room. This time, I positioned myself by the hallway window that overlooked the street. I had noticed Laura leaving the house late at night before, and I was determined to discover her destination. I waited in the darkness, patient and alert. About 20 minutes later, my patience was rewarded. Laura's bedroom door opened with a soft click. She emerged into the hallway, wearing a dark coat and clutching her phone. She moved with practiced stealth, careful not to make a sound. Then she slipped out the front door. My heart racing, I grabbed my jacket and silently followed her into the night. The air was cold and still. Laura walked briskly down the street, and I kept a safe distance, sticking to the shadows. She walked for several blocks until she stopped near a small cafe that was closed for the night. A man was waiting in the shadows near the corner. Even from a distance, I recognized him immediately. It was the same man who had given her the mysterious package days earlier. Laura approached him, and they began a hushed but intense conversation. I hid behind a parked car, straining to hear. Most of their words were lost to the night breeze, but a few sentences drifted clearly to my ears. The man asked, "Are you sure the boy is ready?" Laura sighed, a sound heavy with worry. "No," she replied, "but we're running out of time." My chest tightened. They were definitely talking about me. "Soon he will have to know the truth," the man insisted. Laura looked down, her posture defeated. "I promised his mother I would protect him," she said, her voice cracking. "But I don't know how much longer I can keep this secret."
The world seemed to tilt. His mother? My mother? Why were they talking about her? Before I could process anything else, Laura suddenly turned her head, and looked directly towards my hiding spot. My blood ran cold. I ducked deeper into the shadows, pressing myself against the car. After a terrifying moment, she turned back, and the conversation ended. The man walked away, disappearing into the night, and Laura began her slow walk home. I waited a long time before following, my mind reeling. Back in my bedroom, I lay in the dark, my thoughts a chaotic storm. Laura had mentioned my mother. She had spoken of a promise to protect me, and this mysterious man was somehow connected to it all. For the first time since my father remarried, I began to question my own assumptions. Perhaps Laura wasn't hiding something dangerous. Perhaps she was safeguarding something profoundly important, something connected to my past, a secret my mother had never been able to share. Staring at the ceiling, I realized the mystery was far deeper and more complex than I had ever imagined. And I felt a deep, unshakable certainty that soon I would finally uncover the truth. My stepmother had been protecting all along.
Back in my bedroom, I lay in the dark, my thoughts a chaotic storm. Laura had mentioned my mother. She had spoken of a promise to protect me. And this mysterious man was somehow connected to it all. For the first time since my father remarried, I began to question my own assumptions. Perhaps Laura wasn't hiding something dangerous. Perhaps she was safeguarding something profoundly important, something connected to my past, a secret my mother had never been able to share. Staring at the ceiling, I realized the mystery was far deeper and more complex than I had ever imagined. And I felt a deep, unshakable certainty that soon I would finally uncover the truth my stepmother had been protecting all along. That night, after the clandestine meeting at the cafe, sleep was an impossibility. My mind was a tempest of questions. Why had she mentioned my mother? What was this promise? And why was I the focal point of this elaborate secret?
The following morning, everything had shifted. When I saw Laura in the kitchen, I no longer looked at her with simple suspicion. My feelings were now a complicated blend of confusion, intense curiosity, and a strange new sense of connection. Part of me yearned to confront her then and there, to demand the whole truth. But another part held me back. What if the truth was something I wasn't prepared to face? Laura was quieter than usual during breakfast, avoiding my gaze as if she were wrestling with her own thoughts. Finally, she broke the silence. "Daniel," she said, her voice serious. "Can we talk this evening?" My heart skipped a beat. The moment of revelation had finally arrived. "Okay," I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. The day dragged by interminably. At school, I was a ghost, present in body but completely absent in mind. Every minute felt like an hour. By the time I got home, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. My father was working late, so Laura and I were alone. She was waiting for me in the living room. The television was off, and the room was filled with a tense, expectant silence.
"Daniel," she said softly, patting the space beside her on the sofa, "please, sit down." I sat across from her, my hands clammy. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took a deep, steadying breath. "I know you've been curious about my behavior lately," she began gently, "and I suspect you may have already discovered some things you weren't meant to see." My eyes widened. She knew. "I saw that my notebook had been moved," she continued, her voice kind, not accusatory. "And last night, I think you followed me." A wave of hot shame washed over my face. I stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling like an intruder. To my astonishment, Laura's expression wasn't angry. It was sad and filled with a deep weariness. "It's all right," she said. "You deserve to know the truth. You've deserved it for a long time." She rose and walked to a small cabinet in the corner, returning with a thick, worn envelope. She placed it carefully on the coffee table between us. "This secret," she said, her eyes meeting mine, "it was never really mine to keep. It belonged to your mother." My chest tightened painfully at the mention of her. "My mother?" Laura nodded slowly. "Before your mother passed away, she knew something crucial about your future and your family's past." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What do you mean?" Laura opened the envelope and gently slid out a collection of documents and photographs. One photograph immediately seized my attention. It was a picture of my mother, younger and smiling, standing next to a man I had never seen before. His face was hauntingly familiar. Then it clicked. He was the man Laura had met at the cafe. "That man's name is Michael," Laura explained. "He was your mother's closest friend, her confidant." "Why have I never met him?" I asked, bewildered. Laura sighed. "Because your mother was trying to protect you." My confusion deepened. "Protect me from what?" Laura hesitated, choosing her words with care. "From the truth about your father's business." The words landed like a physical blow. "My father?" Laura nodded grimly. "Years ago, long before you were old enough to understand, your father became entangled in some very dangerous financial dealings. At first, your mother was unaware of it, but when she finally uncovered the truth, she was terrified, not for herself, but for you. I felt my entire world begin to crumble." "What kind of dealings?" I asked, my voice trembling. Laura looked at me with unwavering honesty. "Illegal investments and connections with dangerous people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Your father got in over his head." The image of my father, the quiet, grieving man I knew, shattered. "Your mother tried everything to convince him to get out," Laura continued, "but he was in too deep. The money, the pressure, he felt he couldn't escape." My hands were clenched into fists. "So what happened?" "Michael helped your mother. Secretly, they began gathering evidence. She was building a safety net, a way to protect you if everything fell apart. She planned to use it to ensure your safety, no matter what happened to her or your father." I stared at the pile of documents on the table. "These are the records she collected," Laura said softly. "But why are you involved in all of this?" I asked, looking back at her. Laura met my gaze, her gray eyes glistening. "Because your mother trusted me. We weren't just acquaintances, Daniel. We were best friends. We worked together at the bookstore for years. She was like a sister to me. I was stunned into silence. Before she got sick, Laura continued, her voice thick with emotion. She made me promise. She said, "Laura, if anything ever happens to me, please watch over Daniel, protect him, and when the time is right, help him understand the truth."
Tears began to well in my eyes, blurring my vision. All this time I had misjudged her so completely. "So that's why you married my father?" I whispered. Laura shook her head gently. "No, Daniel. At first, I stayed close to the family to honor my promise to your mother. But over time, something real grew between your father and me. I fell in love with him, and I grew to care for you, not just as a promise, but as my own family." Her voice was sincere, full of warmth. All those secret meetings, the phone calls, the notebook, it was all about deciding when and how to reveal this to you safely. We were waiting for you to be ready, and for the investigation into your father's past to reach a point where you wouldn't be in danger. I felt a profound and confusing mixture of emotions. Sorrow for the burden my mother had carried alone, anger at my father's mistakes, relief that the secret was finally out, and a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. For years, Laura, the woman I had doubted and resented, had been my silent guardian, protecting me from the shadows of my own family's past. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "For what?" she asked. "For not trusting you, for being so cold." Laura smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "That's completely understandable, Daniel. Trust takes time, and you've had a lot to process." For the first time since she had entered our lives, I looked at her with completely different eyes. The suspicion, the distance, the resentment, they were all gone. In their place was respect, gratitude, and the first stirrings of genuine love. In that moment, I understood a profound truth. Sometimes the people we misunderstand the most are the very ones trying hardest to protect us. And the truth behind a secret can be far more complex and far more heartbreaking than we could ever imagine. My stepmother had never been my enemy. She had been my guardian, my mother's chosen protector, all along. And because of her and the sacred promise she kept to my mother, my future was finally free from the shadows of the past.
Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed learning English through this emotional family drama, don't forget to support the channel. Subscribe to Listen and Learn English, like the video, and share it with other English learners. Comment below and tell us, what did you think about Laura's secret? On Listen and Learn English, you will discover more powerful stories, emotional dramas, and engaging English learning content designed to help you improve your listening, vocabulary, and storytelling skills naturally. Keep listening, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next story.